When is it wise to be childlike? Hi, welcome to Putting on a Better Face. We're going to see what we can do about all this situation. I'm Aunt Angel, by the way, and this is the part of the day where I see if I can make at least a little small improvement and reflect on where my mind is at, what's on my mind. And what's on my mind today is a lot to do with yesterday, which was Thanksgiving. And I did get to see my mother and enjoy a brunch with my mother and my son and my brother and my sister-in-law and my nephew. I'm very grateful for that. And my mother and I hadn't seen each other in a few weeks, ever since we had what I call a blowout. I've talked a little about it before, and she and I have had blowouts throughout my life, would be fair to say. Most of the time we get along really, really well and we're really close. And so I think that in some ways makes those blowouts more challenging and worth, reflecting on and trying to work through. I'm big on conflict resolution, trying to learn and grow from the challenges in my life. Pretty much always, and lately is no exception. So when I have a struggle like that, I see it as an opportunity, and I tend to reflect on it a lot. And some of the language, the lenses that are used for some of the dynamics that are going on with my mother and I are, like, there's attachment theory talking about secure and insecure attachments, anxious and avoidant. And then there's chaotic styles like mine, I would say. I tend to be anxious and avoidant, depending on what the other person is doing. And I've spent a lot of my life sort of untangling that in various ways. And relatively recently, in the last few years, come to a new understanding about how my mother and I's relationship is really at the root and the heart of a lot of that, because she was my only and main caretaker for much of my life. And she herself didn't have real secure attachments, although I think there was more security than mine, but it's really hard to say. I would say they're certainly also chaotic. And the other lens that I've been looking at all this through is maturity and childlike qualities, or immaturity. And it's not quite the same as childlike. And that's why I started off by saying, like, can you be childlike and wise, which is often equated with maturity? But wisdom, I like the definition of wisdom is whatever works. And in many ways, being childlike has a wisdom to it, because it tends to be, I'm speaking broadly here, but that state of being childlike tends to be in the moment, very much responding to what is in a more direct way. And in many ways, I think is more wise than what happens to many of us later in life, where we end up being immature but not childlike, if that makes any sense. Am I speaking anybody's linguity out there? I don't know. I'm trying to sort through it all myself. I feel like there's a childlike quality in myself and in my mother and in others, but let's talk about her and I specifically, that I really, really love. It's like my favorite thing about us in some ways, she and I, separately and maybe together in our interactions. And then there's, I'm not sure where the distinction is exactly, but there's an immaturity, and maybe there isn't a distinction. Maybe that's why I'm having trouble with it. But sometimes I end up feeling critical of her immaturity and then hyper aware of how I am reveling in my own immaturity in those instances, you know, in my being critical. And there's this loop of feeling that is different from appreciation of our childlike nature, and more like, gosh, I wish she would be the grown-up, or why do I have to be the grown-up? And reminding myself I am a grown-up now, 52, regardless of whatever, you know, did and didn't get worked out when I was a child in our relationship between us. It isn't helpful to approach our relationship from that dynamic, because now she's 76 and I'm 52. Or as I say, 12. I'm still 12 on some level. That's the issue. She and I had a lot of stuff that didn't get resolved back then, and then parts of me have stayed stuck there. And as I've done this, what's often called parts work, I've come to understand that a big part of the reason for that is that she has a lot of parts of her that have been unresolved with her parents and stuck there. And I see this, you know, this ongoing generational thing that we do. When I try to bring it up with my son, who's 28 right now, he seems to be compartmentalizing most of it and just is too uncomfortable, and he'll say everything's fine and he doesn't think about that sort of stuff, which I'm grateful for on some level, and I'm sure on some level is the truth, and that's great. I think on some level we can't escape this generational wounding that happens, and it's sort of inevitable that at some point in our lives, either it comes up or it's always there running in the subconscious, or maybe both. But anyway, back to my original question of being childlike and wise. And then the juxtaposition of that idea with how I think that it bothers us more when our parents are immature, because we want to be the child, right? And I think, at least in me, I've reflected on this. And hence why I have to remind myself, like, now I'm an adult when I'm around my mother. That doesn't happen very much, if at all, with other people. I think it's happened a little bit in my intimate relationships where I've tried to give authority or dominance to my male partner. And this last round of that I had was a big part of what revealed a lot of this dysfunction in my mother and I's relationship to me, because that's the way revelations work. You start to see a pattern showing up in different places, similar but different ways. And for me, I've learned those are my clues to look for opportunities to grow, for opportunities to see things in a new light and illuminate the darkness, as they say, or as I'm saying. Do they say that? I think they do. Anyway, happy to be here, happy to be still silly. I think this is helping. What do you think? Any of my ramblings resonating with you, please do leave me a comment. Let me know. I'd love to know what you think of any of that. I'd love to know your thoughts on immature parenting. Have you ever, had any thoughts or feelings about your own, either your own parents being immature or you as a parent being, these were some of the first waves I had, was realizing in my 30s, gosh, I am not emotionally mature at all. I'm stuck like a 12-year-old in a lot of my responses and reactions internally, emotionally, to my relationships. And that, once I started to realize that, and that it was my responsibility and take that responsibility, I think initially I thought, oh, this'll be a a fun but challenging 6 months to a year, maybe. I don't think I put a time on it, but I thought, oh, now that I know what I need to do, I'll set about doing it. And what I've discovered is it's been 8 to 12 years, depending on how you count it, since I've had that the first waves of really conscious revelation of that. And of course, I can look back through my life and see how I've had other waves of that going back to 3 years old. And certainly in around that 12-year-old stage where a lot of this started to get stuck, I think. Yeah, and just for a little background, relevant detail perhaps, I was incarcerated at age 13, rare for a female, especially back then. And that's tangled up largely with, with the unresolved conflict between my mother and I. It feels heavy a lot of times. It's a big doozy. And even though I think she and I certainly have gone through lots of work and lots of waves to let it go and release it, and I imagine that she has as well in her own way, still, it's not completely resolved. And it has to do with this immaturity bit that I was getting at. So at some point, one of us has to be the grown-up. And throughout my life, I was going to say that's always been me. That's not fair at all. The thing is, I've always wanted it to be her because she's the adult in our relation. She's the mom in our relationship. Interestingly, I never called her mom. I never called her mommy ever. I call her mother in reference to, but I've always called her by her first name when we're just talking or when talking to her or even about her. And it wasn't until I started school that it became more and more obvious that was unusual. I've met a few other people, usually with pretty significant attachment issues, who call their parents by their first name instead of mommy or daddy. And one could argue that calling parents mommy and daddy is just keeping us in that immature state, and rather than allowing us to grow into our more mature state. Now, I would also pose that from infancy to 3 was a little young to impose that on me. And even though I think I stepped into it beautifully because I've survived and I'm here, and I know I'm not alone. I know many, many infants, including my mother, probably go through their own versions of that. That's how this keeps getting propagated, right? Yeah. Thanks for tuning in and listening. I guess I don't really have a conclusion to all that exactly, which I hope isn't disappointing. I'm just mulling that over. I have a lot of questions. What do you think? Can you be childlike and wise? Do you see a difference between being childlike and being immature? Do you think you can be mature and free in some way? I think that's the word I'm trying to get at. I think that's what I'm equating with childlike. In the moment, does maturity require some aspect of putting yourself into the future and the past and holding yourself in tension? And is that the difference between being mature and childlike, or is it something else? I'd love to know your thoughts on any and all of that. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the description if you want to connect with me. Thank you if you do. There's some links and things down there. I've been working on my merch, working on my affiliates. We're gonna snap this whole puzzle together, Braveheart. Thanks for being you. Thanks for letting me be me. Stay curious, stay courageous, and stay free. Ciao for now.